Okay, it's a couple of minutes after 11 now. I think we can get started, and then as more people come, we can add them in. So, hello everyone, welcome to this webinar today. We're lucky today to be joined by David Dyche from Vegware, who's going to be talking to us about compostable packaging. This webinar will be recorded, but your microphones and cameras should all be turned off. If you have any questions at any point throughout this webinar, then please just type them in the chat or type them in the Q&A, and then after the presentation we'll have time to answer any questions that you have. So at any point, just type them into the chat. Like I said, today we're joined by David from Vegware to talk about compostables. We are not let's say as informed as David to talk about the complicated compostable packaging and around it and things. So David's come in today to talk more about it, and if it is being looked at for the building, then hopefully he can tell you more about it and answer any questions that you have. We at Paperround, the one thing we do know about compostable packaging is that if you are going to have it in your building, then you must have a compostable packaging waste service with your building, and we pride ourselves on our compostable package and compostable waste stream service. We have the UK's only compostable sorting line at our materials recovery facility, and we're also going to be part of a big nationwide project with Vegware and Hubbub and Innovate UK to see how we can improve compostable service even more in commercial buildings. So that's kind of it for me. I'll leave it there and I'll hand over to David, who's going to present to us and talk to us more about compostable packaging. But like I said, if anyone has any questions at any point, then please just feel free to put them in the chat, and then at the end we'll answer as many as we can. So I'll just hand over to David now.
Hi there, I'll just share my screen as well. It's the kind of catchphrase for any webinar. I made the unfortunate decision to watch a couple of recordings from previous presentations in the last week, and it's rather unsettling hearing your own voice, to be honest. So I won't be doing that again. Yeah, what I'm going to do is just chat you through a bit of an introduction to Vegware as a product, kind of why we exist, the products that we have, how our products can be recycled via composting, a little bit of an introduction into the collections that are available in our partnership with Paperround, and then I'll just conclude with a bit of an introduction to the free consultancy that we can provide to Vegware customers to kind of help them get up and running on a composting service. So to start, my laptop's always a little bit slow when I'm going to whiz through slides. Something is not happening here. Let me see, there we go. So I'll just sort of talk about, there's a couple of drawbacks that we saw with standard packaging, standard food packaging that kind of led to the inception of Vegware. The first being that standard packaging tends to be made from oil-based plastics. So oil is obviously a finite resource. We're going to run out of that eventually. So it's quite a good idea to start looking at ways to move away from oil-based plastics. It's also a technique that kind of translocates carbon from deep underground out into our atmosphere. So that's another reason to look at alternative feedstocks. From an end-of-life perspective, there's also some recycling challenges associated with traditional packaging that we'd seek to avoid by using Vegware, and that's kind of why we exist. The company was set up in 2006, and we offer a plant-based and renewable product, which is sustainably sourced, recycled or reclaimed materials are used where we can, and all of our products are commercially compostable with food waste where accepted. And I'll kind of mention the where accepted bit as we move down through the slides. So in terms of end of life, traditional food packaging is challenging for a few different reasons. Firstly, the types of plastic used in traditional packaging can be quite difficult or impossible to recycle. So things like plastic film or polystyrene are a bit of a nightmare. When you also consider the composite materials that are traditionally used in food packaging, things like coffee cups, where you've got a fibrous exterior with a kind of plastic interior lining, very difficult to separate and very difficult to then recycle the plastic lining on the inside. But by far and away, our biggest concern is the food waste and liquid contamination of these products. So not only does that make it particularly hard to recycle the food packaging itself, even if the plastic is recyclable, it also tends to have a pretty big knock-on effect on the rest of the dry mixed recycling streams. Paper and card are particularly vulnerable to food waste contamination. So in all likelihood, a majority of the food packaging is going to end up in incineration or landfill, which obviously isn't great. But what Vegware does is provide an alternative whereby all of our products can be placed into one bin. They'll be sent off for recycling via composting. And not only are you able to capture the packaging, you're also able to capture the food scraps and contamination that would ordinarily be treated as contamination and sent off to incineration. So there's kind of a twofold benefit there at the end of life. I'll just give you a bit of an introduction to some of the materials that we use in our products. I suppose the headline act is PLA, polylactic acid. So that's our substitute for PET. It's basically a clear plastic that's pretty versatile. You can add chalk to the mixture when you're creating it to make crystallized polylactic acid, which is a little bit better for heat resistance properties. So that's for things like hot cup lids and cutlery. Bagasse is our alternative to polystyrene. So obviously there's a lot coming out across the UK at the moment in terms of banning of expanded polystyrene. So Bagasse provides a great alternative to that. It's a lot more breathable, so you get less sweaty chips. That's our kind of motto. It's made from reclaimed sugarcane. So the sugar industry uses sugarcane, it presses it to extract the juices, which then go on to be refined into sugar. And the waste product tends to be incinerated. So what we can do is provide a second lease of life for those waste products to create bagasse. Paper and card is pretty self-explanatory. It's made from trees, so it's fully plant-based and it's compostable. The inks that we use are all vegetable or water-based, which means that they adhere to compostability requirements. NatureFlex is one of our products which is actually home compostable as well as commercially compostable. It's got certification to show that it will break down within a home composting bin within a number of months. And that's made from the cellulose found in wood pulp. Our fun fact of the day is always that this is also the clear plastic that's used on quality street wrappers. And then the last one there is palm leaves. That's another pretty self-explanatory one. The leaves fall to the ground as part of an existing industry, where they're cleaned, dried, pressed, and made into wonderful shapes. And all of the materials you can see on screen at the moment are commercially compostable within 12 weeks. So what that does is give us a circular economy solution whereby our products are made from plants. These get used in the canteen and placed into the right bin. They go off to be made into compost, and that compost can be used to grow new plants, which lets us start the circle again. We have over 450 odd products now, I think, which means that we should be able to cater for any requirement you may have in the food catering arena. All of our products are made from plants. We do have certification, which shows that our products are going to break down within 12 weeks. And the reason that we invest so heavily in certification is because it gives us that level of trust with waste processing facilities to show that, yes, we're saying our products are compostable, and yes, this is the time frame that they're going to break down in. Sorry, my motorbike just drove past my flat. There's two standards that we really focus on the European side of things. It's EN 13432, and in the US it's ASTM D6400. So write that down. There'll be a quiz at the end, but hopefully you'll share that with your families. The composting process itself, that's a before and after picture, so we know that it works. Waste will arrive on site in biobags. That's shredded to increase the surface area. That allows the bacteria better access to the organic materials. It'll get shoved into a sealed vessel, which has a steady airflow through the bottom of it and out the top. And over time, the naturally occurring bacteria will start to get to work breaking down the organic materials. That will result in increased heat. You don't tend to need any additional heat capacity for in-vessel composting. It sort of does it itself, and it'll reach temperatures of around 65 to 70 degrees Celsius. And that's perfect because it's the kind of temperatures that we need to break down our products, things like polylactic acid and bagasse. but it's also the perfect temperature to kill off any pathogens and adhere to animal byproduct regulations. So it works out just perfectly. That'll get pulled out of the vessel after 2 to 3 days and laid out in open windrows. And these are turned over the course of about 7 to 12 weeks. And at the end of that process, you're left with compost. There's one final step where you need to just remove any larger clumps and any remaining contamination, and possibly use some magnets and other machinery to remove anything that shouldn't be in there. And you'll have fantastic past 100 compost at the end, which can be spread out onto local fields. And that whole process should take around 50 days. So just in terms of the benefits to composting, so beyond simply providing an easier to recycle item of packaging, there's a lot of benefits from an environmental perspective to compost. First of all, it sequesters carbon. So soil is a fantastic carbon sink, but it's one that's particularly vulnerable at the moment to climate change. The more that soil erodes, the more carbon is released into the atmosphere, and it's a kind of self-perpetuating feedback system. What we want to do is try and increase the health of soil by adding compost, and hopefully that'll help to retain carbon. Compost also helps to improve soil structure, which means that you're going to have better maximum yield potential for your crops, and your fields are going to become more resilient and basically last for a little bit longer. There's a comment in the bottom right there that says for the UK is about 30 to 40 years away from eradication of soil fertility. Obviously that statement was made a few years back, so we're getting closer to that point. So it's important that we try and pump as many natural nutrients back into the system as possible and try and take a step away from artificial fertilizers. Compost is fantastic for reducing flood risk. So obviously all these environmental issues are pretty tied together. Climate change is occurring as a result of carbon making its way into the atmosphere, and that's having a knock-on effect on the fields. So if we can find ways to improve resilience to this, then that's good. So compost can hold up to 4 times its weight in water, which means that it's a fantastic way to try and prevent runoff of soil from fields and also prevent leaching into local waterways. One of the kind of headline benefits to composting for our customers is that it doesn't rely on export. It's a very tightly regulated waste industry where standard plastics can kind of be sent off to multiple end destinations, which fluctuate depending on market forces. Compost tends to be a very sort of steady system and very localized. And this is incredibly appealing to our customers because it allows them to tell the story of we're using this product on site and it's being composted nearby to be used on local fields. And then the last comment is just that it creates local jobs, both within agriculture and the waste industry. So from Vegware perspective, our approach is interesting. We are predominantly a packaging and sales company, but we do have an environmental team of 3 who are waste management consultants that focus very heavily on trying to improve access to composting routes for our customers. So my particular job as a waste management consultant is kind of split roughly 50-50. Half the time I'm working with waste processors, so composting facilities, to show that our products are going to break down within their systems within the timeframes that they need. And then I'm also working with waste collectors to say, look, there's a huge demand from our customers to find the right outlet for our products. Why don't you harness that and set up a collection round? And then the other half of my job is really working alongside our customers directly to make the introductions to waste collectors and then kind of hold their hand throughout the process of implementing a composting solution to make sure that it does work, that it's effective, and that we reach really good recycling rates. And I'll kind of talk about what our step-by-step process is to that as we reach the end of the presentation. So in terms of our partnership with Paper Round, it's a very good one. In 2019, we were kind of desperate for a composting collection round in London. Obviously, as you can imagine, there's a huge customer base in London. It's a very big city. And Paper Round were starting to pick up on that as well and getting some questions from their customers in regards to composting routes. So it was decided that a 1-year trial would be launched across 12 sites. It proved incredibly successful. And at the end of that process, it was decided that Paper Round were going to launch a full regular collections in both London and Brighton. Vegware made a joint investment with Paper Round, which were mentioned at the start, to implement a picking station at their sorting office out in Purfleet. just to add that extra level of protection against contamination. Obviously, we want most of that contamination to be removed at the front end, at the bins on site, but if one or two things do sneak through, there is that sort of safety net to try and help out. We know that the system's successful. One of the reasons Paper Round launched the service was the success of a particular law firm as part of the trial, where they managed to get to a point of 85 to 90% Vegware within the Vegware bin, which is pretty impressive for a freshly launched service. But there were also benefits across the rest of the waste streams. So that included a 40% reduction in contamination in the dry mix recycling stream and a 6% reduction in the amount of general waste produced. And then alongside that, of course, they were capturing the food scraps, which would ordinarily have been treated as general waste. So there's kind of benefits across the whole waste stream when you implement a composting collection, and we'll look at how we make that success in a couple of slides' time. So we've got a whole load of varied sites on board at the moment. We've got large office buildings, cafes, we've got a hairdresser, and we work with the film industry. So there's no real recipe as to what a successful site is going to be. It's really up to yourselves. If you're using Vegware, we'll look at trying to provide a collection for you and try and talk you through the best way to implement that. And all of that helps us get to a point where I can put a shameless plug of myself looking good in a bow tie. We do get nominated for plenty of awards. In particular, that's the IWFM Impact Awards last year. So that's related to the facilities management side of things. So yeah, things are going quite well, and we'd always recommend Paper Round in both London and Brighton, and we're happy to work together with them to help you get onto a composting route. If you don't fall within Paper Round coverage, I know we've shared this quite widely on LinkedIn, so there may be a few people up in Scotland listening, or perhaps other parts of the UK. There are other solutions. The first one I would mention is our own close the loop service across the central belt of Scotland. So that runs across Edinburgh to Glasgow and slightly up into Fife. We realised a few years back that there wasn't a collection, and we kind of wanted to show a proof of concept that if a packaging company can set up a collection, then why can't waste collectors? And that's been going from strength to strength over the last few years. Other options, we do work with some other waste collectors up and down the country. We've got coverage in Birmingham, the home counties, Cambridgeshire, the north of Scotland. So there may well be a regular collection where you are, and we'd be happy to help you look for one. If that's not the case and you don't fall within regular coverage, it's not the end of the world. You could always look at a dedicated skip or compactor collection. This tends to work better for larger sites with a little bit of space to store these, and basically you would fill up the skip over the course of a few weeks and then arrange for a dedicated composting facility. Option 4 is a national postback service. If you're using pretty small volumes of Vegware, you could look at potentially getting a courier collection to send it off to composting. And then step 5, you've got the option of on-site solutions. So this tends to work for sites that have a bit more scope to try something a bit more inventive and have a little bit of a budget to play around with. There's a few different options, and we'd be happy to help you explore them and make some introductions. And what it does is let you have a really nice kind of closed loop system on your site, whereby you're using the output from your waste on your own flower beds. So the kind of moral of this slide is, regardless of where you are in the UK and regardless of how big or small you are, we're happy to kind of help you look for the right solution for your company. So just to finish off, I'll briefly talk through the 5 steps to zero waste process that we follow. And this is kind of everything that we do from the point of somebody coming to us saying we want to implement a composting solution, right through to launching the service and then sitting back and thinking, how are we doing? Can we improve? So step 1 is a switch of all disposables to Vegware. So this kind of falls into the idea of protecting our composting systems. We've built up a lot of trust with composting facilities, and we don't want to be sending non-Vegware material to these sites. We can't guarantee that other compostable companies are going to compost within the timeframes required. There's no legislation that says to claim to be compostable, you need to break down within X number of weeks. So we kind of want to avoid sending the wrong things to these services. It's important to mention as well that the Paper Round service is Vegware exclusive, and that kind of allows us to have an extra level of protection for these systems as well. The other thing we want to avoid is sending traditional plastics to composting as well. Things can get quite confusing when you've got a mixture of compostable, Vegware and standard packaging on site. They can look quite similar. The designs look quite similar. So it's a lot easier to try and make that full switch to compostable Vegware, just for ease of your customers as well. We do have a range of over 450 products, and we've got sales teams, sales reps up and down the country who are very, very good at product matching and providing alternatives to any use that you may have. We should have a Vegware alternative to anything that you're currently using. So step 2 is finding the best recycling solution and labeling your bins. So from an external point of view, we leave that to the experts. Paper Round know exactly what they're doing in terms of logistics, collection schedules, and all that side of things. From an internal perspective, we can support with pointing you in the right direction for internal bins, positioning of those, and we can provide bespoke bin signage like the ones that you can see on the screen just now. That really focuses on bright, colourful messaging, lots of imagery, and we use images of the exact products which are being used on site, which makes it quite easy for somebody to walk up to a bin, see something in front of them and think, well, that's exactly the item I've got in my hand. I'm going to put that in this particular bin. We reckon you've got about 1 second of somebody's time when they reach a bin to help them make a decision. So it's important that you make this process as easy as possible. Step 3 is communicating the system. So this is everything that comes into play prior to somebody reaching the bins. It's kind of reinforcing that message that yes, Vegware is being used on site, and yes, it's being sent to composting. If you can kind of raise awareness with that, it should make things easier for somebody to take a little bit more care once they reach the bins. And we can offer a whole range of materials to support with that. We've got bespoke posters, table talkers, animations for your screens. We've got an in-house communications and an in-house creative team, which means that they can kind of turn things around quite quickly and they can be a bit more creative with what they're trying to produce. And we can work alongside your internal communications teams to try and send out the right message. And yeah, it's all about kind of reinforcing this is going to compost, and the more that people become aware of that, the more that they're aware of the need to avoid contamination, because they obviously don't want to send plastic to soils. We've heard a lot about plastic in the oceans, and the latest kind of talking point is plastic in our soils. So yeah, it's just an opportunity to raise awareness. Step 4 is training and engagement. So from a training perspective, we can support the cleaning teams or the catering teams to feel comfortable and confident answering any questions about the product, to understand why the switch has been made, and how the new system's been implemented, and that helps to build a little bit of ownership of the system as well. This can take the form of presentations like this. Potentially we can share some resources as well to stick up in the back rooms, just to kind of help out where we can. Engagement, we can help a site to arrange a lunch day or an engagement day over lunchtime, which really gives the opportunity for end users or customers and diners to ask a few questions about the product, ask questions about what goes into which particular bin, and just feel a little bit more comfortable about using the system. And the hope is that all of these steps will help to really launch the service with a bit of enthusiasm, I think, enough to kind of get the system up and running and hopefully avoid as much contamination as we can. And then the last step, step 5, sort of falls a little bit after you've got the service up and running. I know Paper Round are very, very good at offering audits. They can give you a lot of valuable feedback as to how the service is going in terms of contamination and recycling rates. And once we've got those measurements, Vegware can support with providing communications to address those. So if things aren't going well and you've got a repeat offender in terms of contamination, maybe people are leaving metal cutlery inside big ass boxes, we can create some messaging to kind of address that. Conversely, if things are going really, really well, we want to shout about that and then maintain that enthusiasm, and try and get people excited about the service and keep that enthusiasm running throughout the first year, 2 years, until it becomes norm for people to use the bins correctly. We can create case studies or films to kind of show and shout about how well you're doing. Obviously, this is a great promotional tool for the site itself, because it lets you sort of say, this is why we made the change. We want you to be more sustainable, and these are the efforts and how we've worked with Vegware to make that happen. So there's a lot of options on this stage as well. just to sort of shout about how the service is going. I've really kind of whizzed through what we do, but I'm more than happy to take any questions as now. The email address up on screen is our shared account, so that's the best one to reach myself and my colleagues Jack and Ailey, and hopefully one of us will be able to pick up on your query quite quickly. And that's me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, just that slide there at the end with the email address and contact information. Following this webinar, I'll email everyone out these slides and that email address and David's email address. So any follow-up questions or anything after this that you want to touch base on, then you'll have that information. Just like I said at the start, if anyone has any questions, then please just put them in the chat box now. We've got a couple of them there, but just before we go on to them, just to reiterate some of the things David said about what we can do. We have our own compostable sorting line at our facility, again, just to have that extra level of sorting, because compostable packaging can often look like normal packaging. So we just have that extra line of defense to make sure we're sending the right materials to the right reprocessor. And in terms of audits, we do, if we have a client who's got a compostable service, we do an audit once a year with them free of charge, just to make sure that, again, like David said, if they're doing things incorrectly, then we can make suggestions to improve, and if they're doing things well, then we can shout about it. Couple of questions we've had, David. So the in-vessel composting sites, where are they located? And are there multiple ones around the UK, or maybe in London in particular? Where would be the in-vessel composting sites located for compostable and Vegware packaging?
Yeah, so there's multiple located up and down the country. There's certainly quite a few that we work with, that we've run trials with, that are happy to accept our product. There's one in particular in Cambridgeshire, where a lot of the waste from down kind of London, home counties direction, all kind of flows into there. But there's sites up in Scotland, there's ones up towards the middle of the country as well. So it's not a case of you're going to recycle your Vegware up in Scotland and it's going to get shipped all the way down to London. It tends to be relatively localized services. When you get to the point of maybe a site that's not covered by a regular collection, there's a little bit more mileage involved, just because there's not in-vessel composters in certain parts of the country, so it might have to travel a little bit further. But that's why you get to the point of bulking up to a point where it's worth doing so. But yeah, located all over the place.
Okay, great. And another question was, what does the future hold for Vegware? That's quite a broad question and open. You can answer it how you want, because you said 2009 Vegware started, so in
2006.
Relatively new company. So what is Vegware looking for in the future? And then also, if you could touch on kind of the compostable packaging, sort of what the future holds for that, because again, just like Vegware, it's relatively new, and kind of what does the next few years look like for both of those?
Yeah, so from a company perspective, we became part of Novalex, which is a large multinational company last year, and that's a company it's got a lot of tie-ins with kind of compostables and compostable solutions. So it gives us a lot more sort of range and access and backing to try something a bit new, and hopefully push the compostability side of things, perhaps look a bit more towards Europe at some point down the line. We already do a bit of work there, but hopefully we can try and expand that. And it's just about sort of, I think, saturating what we have at the moment. About 10 years ago, it used to be incredibly difficult to try and encourage collectors to accept compostables. We're now at a point where we've got collection companies coming to us saying, we would like to set up this solution, can you kind of work with us? So I think it's about saturating the solutions that we have in place and building up those collection rounds as much as possible as well. So that's certainly the sort of goal from within the UK. From a compostables perspective as a whole, it is still a sort of baby industry. We're still kind of pushing against the giants of standard packaging, and hopefully I think it's going to be all about kind of making ourselves stand out as an alternative rather than being grouped in with kind of standard plastics, to show that there is a solution. It's kind of winning round governance to show composting solutions are available. It's a solution that works. The waste industry is getting on board. Can we get a bit more support to kind of push this? Yeah, a lot of movement at the moment, I think.
Yeah, and just touching on adding a bit more to that, David. Like I said at the start, we're doing Paper Round, or now we're known as Recora, are working with Vegware and Innovate UK and the Behaviour Change Specialist Hubbub in a project over the next few months. Because like David said, it's still a very new industry and there's not a lot of guidance out there on how best to implement that, either in households or in commercial buildings. So we're doing a project with those people in the next few months to really see what that sort of engagement piece that David also spoke about in his 5-step guide about how you really get people to use the service correctly. So we're doing a big project with that, which will hopefully provide good guidance on how to really get people in the office and in the workplace using the compostable stream correctly. If anyone has any other questions, then please put them in the chat function. Like I've just replied to Carla, these slides will be, we'll send these slides out afterwards, and we'll put a recording up on our YouTube and you can send that out to anyone and they can watch that at any point. Someone has asked, do you have any punchy flyers comparing the life cycle impact of plastic packaging and plant products? So do you have any information, not necessarily flyers, but we can turn them into flyers, but do you have any information, David, about the life cycle impact of plastic packaging and Vegware products?
We don't at the moment. What we're working on over the course of this year is creating life cycle analysis for a shopping basket of the most used materials. So examples of our core ranges, kind of cups, pots, cutlery, kind of a little bit of everything to sort of see how they would compare to kind of standard packaging and how the different end of life solutions affect those life cycle analysis. So if it's going to composting, what happens if it's going to incineration? Does that make a huge difference? And kind of working out where we sit with that is a pretty hefty project. So we can't make a commitment exactly when it's going to come out, but it is something that we're working on with our university research team at the moment. So hopefully sometime soon-ish.
Okay, good. And someone's asked from Dorset how they would be able to get a collection for their Vegware and how much it would cost. So maybe not getting into the specifics of that, but David, how would, if a organization wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to get in touch with you to start a service or to look at introducing Vegware?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely reach out to environmental@vegware.co.uk. What we would do is probably give you a call and chat through it specifically. Dorset's one of the areas that's not quite there yet with a regular collection, but there is something potentially in the works. But there's, like I say, there's certainly other options to explore. So what we would do is look at each individual site on an individual basis, try and work out what exactly would suit for them. But yeah, environmental@vegware.co.uk is the one to go for.
Okay, great. And that was on the last slide, so I'll make sure I send that out with all the follow-up information. Is there an approach / method in particular that Vegware has found works best for engaging more people on using their service and getting people on board? So what are your best engagement tactics that you do?
I think the step 4 training and engagement is a pretty key part of the process. I think if we can get sites on board to kind of shout about what they're doing to their customers, that helps. I suppose going right back to the beginning, we sometimes have the situation where maybe a catering manager or a facilities manager is coming to us hopeful for a collection service. What really helps move things along a lot quicker is if those parties are kind of talking to each other from the beginning. I think getting everybody around the table from the start tends to speed things up a lot more and get the decision makers on board, because they can see a concerted effort from both sides of the table. And yeah, as you proceed through the steps, I think the engagement side of things is pretty useful and bringing the whole site on board.
Yeah, and just touching on that as well, David, getting everyone around the table whenever you first want to looking at this or implementing it, and we often find that it's the end of life, so the composting of that material is often kind of left behind around that table at the start. People don't often make the connection between a compostable packaging needs to go in a compostable waste stream, and it can't just go in with food waste or with mixed recycling. So we really recommend that's taken into consideration whenever, I mean, being a waste management company, we're obviously going to shout about that, but we often make sure that people know that it needs to be in a compostable waste stream.
Yeah,
if you do get compostable packaging.
I think picking up as well on the idea that it's going to improve the rest of the waste streams as well. I think a lot of the time it feels like it's going to be a lot of hard work just to sort of shout about, yes, we're doing the right thing. And from a waste perspective, that can seem quite challenging. But the challenges that come with trying to encourage people to use the right Vegware bin and maybe deal with a little bit of contamination in there is going to be sort of balanced out by improvements in the mixed recycling bins and the general waste bins, and it should hopefully help to make that side of things a bit easier, and there'll be a bit of payoff that improves as you go down the line as well.
Yeah. Question about any tests carried out regarding a cup holding liquid. If I left over the weekend and my cup had a liquid in it on Monday morning, would there be a puddle on my desk, or is a compostable packaging cup just as good as a normal packaging cup, let's say?
Yeah, so they're pretty much designed to act in exactly the same way as a standard packaging. In particular, PLA needs pretty specific conditions to start to break down. It's not designed to kind of break down at room temperature. It's not designed to break down when it's a little bit wet for a short period of time. It kind of needs high temperatures, specific moisture conditions, and kind of basically commercial composting conditions to get to a point where it's going to break down like that. So no, it wouldn't just be a puddle.
Okay, well, thank you, David. If we don't have any more questions, then like I said, I'll send everything over, and there'll be a recording on our YouTube channel, which you can send to all your colleagues, and if anyone else wants to listen in to what we've spoken about today. And if anyone has any other follow-up questions or wants to know any more information about Vegware and compostable packaging and the waste service that we provide, then please just let us know. But thank you again, David, for joining us today for this webinar and for telling us more about compostable packaging. And thank you everyone for attending today and listening to it. Like I said, I'll send all that out as soon as I can, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks for inviting me.